A young knight named Sir Dashing Jr. only got knighted because they couldn't knight his dad twice. Now he's determined to prove that he's worthy of his new title. Along with an awkward friar, an aspiring ranger, and a book-loving orc, Sir DJ will venture across the territory to find the amulet of the goddess, proving that he's worthy of his knightly title. The Legend of by Aaron N. Hall is an affectionate parody of the fantasy genre, receiving praise from audiences and critics alike. Go to aaronnhall.com to download a free early copy of The Legend of before its release on February 25th, 2025. So what are you waiting for? Download it today. That's AARON, another N, HALL.com.
Welcome, Wanderer, to a truly special milestone, episode number 200 of Lore of the Rings. I can hardly believe we've reached this moment, and it's all thanks to you, my fellow Wanderer, on this incredible journey through Middle-earth. I'm Aaron, your guide to wandering the world and works of J.R.R. Tolkien. To celebrate our wandering together, I aspired to prepare something extraordinary, something that echoes the spirit of Tolkien's literary club, the Inklings, that legendary group of writers and thinkers who gathered to share their stories, their ideas, and their love for words. Much like Tolkien and Lewis did with their friends, I've reached out to some of my past guests and current listeners, asking what seemed an impossible question. What is your single favorite line from Tolkien's works? I lit the beacons calling for aid, and you answered, with thoughtful, heartfelt, and inspiring words. In this episode, you'll hear beloved passages from The Hobbit, The Lord of the Rings, and even from the films. You'll hear the voices of those who shared their favorite lines and why these words resonate so deeply with them. And I'll share my own reflections as we journey through the heart of Tolkien's legendarium together. So whether you're here for the first time or you've been walking this path with me since episode 1, thank you for being a part of this wandering party. I don't say this enough, but I am honored and humbled that you wander the tales of Middle-earth with me. Let's celebrate the words that have shaped our imaginations and honor the legacy of the professor himself. Now, let's wander. We begin with a very special line, a line that burst from Tolkien and started him and us on the adventure of Middle-earth. The first line of Tolkien's first published work of fiction, The Hobbit. Quote, "In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit." For this opening line, two fellow wanderers selected this as their favorite. Our first thoughts come from Danae, co-host of the Captain's Pod. You may remember Danae from episode number 168, where she and her co-host Ian joined us to compare and contrast the worlds of Middle-earth and Star Trek. Here's what Danae had to say.
Hi, my name is Danae, and I'm really excited to weigh in on the topic today, but it's a big, hefty one, and I'm sure everyone has struggled with finding their favorite meaningful Tolkien quotes. I struggled with this for weeks and weeks. I reread poetry. I attempted to take one of my favorite parts of the Lord of the Rings trilogy and piece all the quotes kind of together to talk about the redemptive arc that happens throughout the story of The Lord of the Rings, which is one of the most meaningful things for me. And nothing really stuck until this one. In a hole in the ground, there lived a hobbit. I know, it's short. But here's why I love it so much. As a writer and a content creator, I get stuck a lot. I can second guess myself. I can be really hard on myself. And I think I forget that sometimes you just start writing and then something magical happens. Or sometimes you start to create an audio podcast and something magical happens. I have a podcast that I have had in my back pocket for a long time that I've been starting to develop sort of in secret and kind of waiting for this perfect opportunity to launch it to the world. And I keep stopping myself because I don't know, maybe it's just not perfect yet. Maybe it won't connect with everybody. But that one line of Tolkien is incredibly inspiring for those of us who are imaginative and inventive and creative, because there wasn't a hobbit before that line. And did Tolkien even know what a hobbit was before that moment? Was it just free-form writing, and then once he had asked the question, he had to answer it? Sometimes we just don't know what's going on around us. And we have to, as the quote says, fake it till you make it. And sometimes you're writing something or you're creating something or you're doing something in your life just for yourself. And you really never know what it's going to turn into. I'm so thankful that he wrote that line. And I'm so thankful that from that launched a treasure trove of stories, arguably the birth of a genre of writing that I still enjoy to this day. And this encouragement that it doesn't have to make sense to everybody to just jump in and do it. I don't want to insinuate that I think that Tolkien's writing is haphazard and aloof and without purpose. I think the opposite of that. But in the world of Tolkien, I think we're just so well cared for because of the richness of how Tolkien writes. If you love Tolkien, which I'm sure you do because you're listening to this podcast, there's just moments of writing that are filled with joy and sorrow and excitement and exhilaration. And it all started because he chose to write something that had never been written before and then make sense of it and not stop. And I want to do the same. So that's my favorite quote.
And our second submission comes from Austin.
I have to say that is my favorite because it started everything Tolkien did for us in this world, is publish his books.
Thank you, Danae and Austin, for that wonderful line, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." Yes, I have to agree with you. This was the start of an adventure for Tolkien and for all of us. You know, as the story goes, he was grading some exam papers as a professor. I think it was at Oxford at the time. There was some extra space on a paper. He flipped it over and just wrote this line, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." And that had never occurred to him before. As Danae said, he posed this question, what is a hobbit? And then he had to explore that answer. What is a hobbit? I think it's so funny. In almost every chapter of the Hobbit film, you have all of these new creatures that are new to Bilbo. You've got trolls and elves and dwarves and golem and dragons and even mortal men. All of these creatures are new to Bilbo, and they always ask, every single one of them, what is a hobbit? I've never heard of a hobbit before. In fact, this was one of the key reasons why Gandalf wanted Bilbo to be part of Thorin's company, was because Smaug had never smelled a hobbit before. So I just love how Tolkien started The Hobbit with this line, "In a hole in the ground there lived a hobbit." He posed this question, had to find an answer, and that question is posed all throughout that book of The Hobbit, and then even continues further in this. After the success of The Hobbit, people wanted a sequel, and so he started writing his quote-unquote sequel to The Hobbit, which turned into The Lord of the Rings and expanded everything out into the whole legendarium that we have today, with, of course, The Hobbit and the finding of the One Ring, and also Elrond being sort of those key bridges in between all of the stories that Tolkien had in his mind, all of the languages that he had in his mind, into becoming the legendarium of The Lord of the Rings and Middle-earth. Absolutely beautiful. Well, in that comfortable hobbit hole several decades later, Bilbo was preparing for a long-expected party. In preparation for that party, Bilbo had written out several notes to go along with possessions that he gave away, some of which were quite pointed, as is this favorite line from Kathleen, quote, "For Dora Baggins, in memory of a long correspondence, with love from Bilbo, on a large waste paper basket." Dora was Drogo's sister, and the eldest surviving female relative of Bilbo and Frodo. She was 99, and had written reams of good advice for more than half a century. That's the ultimate burn from Bilbo. Here you go, here's a waste paper basket for all of your wonderful advice that you've been handing out for 99 years. That's fantastic. Let's hear what Kathleen had to say.
I love this part of what some have termed passive-aggressive gift-giving. I think of Dora's wastebasket when I get unsolicited advice, and I try not to be Dora myself. This quote really shows Tolkien's keen wit and that wonderful dry English humor. I'm considering tagging some of my own possessions for later posthumous distribution, just like Bilbo did.
Yes, this is that wit and that dry humor. Tolkien just has these sprinkled all throughout, that wit, the irony. That's one of the hallmarks, I think, of what sets Tolkien apart from other writers. I love that. That's fantastic. Thank you. Next is David, whose favorite line comes from Fellowship of the Ring, though this character did not receive a birthday present from Bilbo, but rather Bilbo had taken his birthday present away. Yes, I'm talking about Gollum. Quote, "He wandered in loneliness, weeping a little for the hardness of the world, and he journeyed up the river, till he came to a stream that flowed down from the mountains. And he went that way. He caught fish in deep pools with invisible fingers, and ate them raw. One day it was very hot, and as he was bending over a pool, he felt a burning on the back of his head, and a dazzling light from the water pained his wet eyes. He wondered at it, for he had almost forgotten about the sun. Then, for the last time, he looked up and shook his fist at her.
I love this passage, particularly the end bit where he says, and he looked up for the last time and shook his fist at her. That last line, for me, I read that when I was 16 for the first time, and it seemed quite funny. The idea of anyone shaking their fist at the sun. What a crazy, futile gesture. The sun couldn't care less. In Middle-earth, of course, there is actually something there, a great symbolism that even when I read it for the first time, I could understand. It was Gollum truly turning away from the light into darkness. I think this was kind of the first time I kind of realised I was reading a story where our rules didn't necessarily apply. Shaking your fist at the sun means something quite profound there. Imagine if he hadn't. Imagine if actually he turned back towards the sun, he remembered, oh yeah, the light, and turned back. The story would be completely different, and who knows where it would have gone. Aaron, your podcast has helped me see these moments and understand what Tolkien was writing all so many times. But this one, I understood all by myself. So I think that's why it's my favourite passage. Also, whenever you reread it, read it in Ian McKellen's voice. It sounds even better.
Well, I love that advice. I will definitely have to read that line in Ian McKellen's voice. I don't think I could do a good Ian McKellen, but David, just hearing your accent, I think as an American over here in the United States, I think that's perfect. That's just absolutely perfect to look at some Tolkien lines from that. And yes, absolutely. I love that you said that you recognized this when I think you said you were 16 when you recognized this. What a beautiful thing to be a young person and exploring Middle-earth for the first time in your early years. And you realize, as you said, that the rules of our world don't quite apply, that we are in another world, a fantasy world, the world of fairy stories, or the perilous realm, I think as Tolkien might call it. And indeed, what if Gollum had not shaken his fist at the sun and had turned back to the light? Yeah, this would be an absolutely totally different story. Where would the ring have ended up? Would Bilbo have found it? Would it have passed to Frodo and then on to the fires of Mount Doom? Or would Gollum have wandered back to Sauron, being drawn by the ring? Maybe he could have had some inner battle back to the light within him. I don't know. That's an interesting what-if scenario to consider. I love that. Our next two favorite lines are both from the chapter Lothlorien in Fellowship of the Ring. In both of these lines, we can see the workings of two major themes, light versus darkness, as we just heard from David, and love in a fleeting mortal life. First, we have Clint, whom you may remember from episode number 197, where we discussed Tolkien's influence on the fascinating world of tabletop role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons. Quote, "In this high place, you may see the two powers that are opposed one to another, and ever they strive now in thought, but whereas the light perceives the very heart of the darkness, its own secret has not yet been discovered."
I love this because it feels like Tolkien is breaking the third wall here, speaking directly through Haldir to the reader about the nature of good and evil. Light, goodness, understands evil for all of its ugliness, but evil will never truly understand goodness because to evil, what is good, what is right, what is just seems like foolishness.
Yes, good insight here, Clint, that light can understand evil, but evil doesn't necessarily understand light. In the First Age stories of Middle-earth and the Silmarillion, this was not so much the case. Evil was a foreign, alien sort of concept to the Valar, and it took them a while to really understand the nature of evil. But by the time you get to these closing years of the Third Age, you do have a lot more wise elves and other beings who understand that nature of evil. And in fact, that is one of the major advantages that good has over Sauron. You've got Gandalf, who perceives the heart of Sauron, that Sauron believes that no one would ever try to destroy the ring. Why would they do that? Right? He has that hubris. You've got Galadriel, who Haldir here is referencing to, right? That Galadriel is sort of doing these psychological war games with Sauron, trying to find him, yet he can't find her. Aragorn as well. He's like, oh, we have all these armies between Frodo and Mount Doom. Let me march my armies to the Black Gate, and I will draw Sauron out. I know he'll take the bait. Right? And so you have all of these forces of light and goodness who can understand evil and use that to their advantage. When evil sees the light and the goodness doing things, it seems like foolishness to them. I love how you said that. That's fantastic. The second line from the Lothlorien chapter is from fellow wanderer Volker. This is Aragorn speaking. Quote, "Here is the heart of elvendom on earth," he said, "and here my heart dwells ever, unless there be a light beyond the dark roads that we still must tread, you and I. Come with me." And taking Frodo's hand in his, he left the hill of Cairn Amrath and came there never again as living man.
I simply love this line because it has so many layers. It hints at Aragorn's role, which we're only beginning to understand in the first book. It captures his heroic choice not to remain idle in the place he loves most, but to press onward. Also, the final sentence is bittersweet to me. It leaves the hope that a part of Aragorn might one day return, even if only in spirit. To me, Tolkien's works are filled with lines that evoke similar feelings, but none feel quite as pointed, weighty, or layered with sadness and foreboding as this one. I have to admit that I always have to put the book down for a while after that chapter.
Yes, Volker, I love that how you say that sometimes there are some lines in The Lord of the Rings and Tolkien's works that really evoke a lot of emotion in us. And this is one of those. This is one of my favorite lines as well. I really love Aragorn and his story arc and his adventure. And this does hint at his role, his heroic choice, as you said, to press onward. And you also hinted at another major theme that Aragorn is tied into, which is hope. He always has hope. My heart dwells here. Clearly, he's referencing Arwen, who used to live there in Lothlorien for a long, long time. That's I think that's actually where he met her for the first time. I can't remember. We know that he never comes back again as a living man. Does he come back in spirit, like you say? What is the fate of men after death? That is a major question that Tolkien really wrestles with in the cosmology and the philosophy of all of his works, is what is the nature of death for those of us who must die? That's a beautiful thought to wrestle with. Well, to further this theme of Aragorn knowing his eventual fate, as all mortals do, Jason Densel provides the next favorite line. You may remember Jason from all the way back in episode number 94, where he and I compared Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings with Robert Jordan's Wheel of Time.
The passage I chose as one of my favorites, even though it's impossibly hard to settle on just one from all of Tolkien's work, I'm actually going to cheat a little bit, and I'm going to start with a passage from the movies, but I'll bring it back to the books, and here's why. It's the scene in the movie of The Two Towers. Elrond is trying to convince his daughter Arwen not to go, or to go into the West, and to not stay behind and linger back with Aragorn. He says to her, "Whether by the sword or by the slow decay of time, Aragorn will die. He will come to death, an image of the splendor of the kings of men in glory, undimmed before the breaking of the world. But you, my daughter, you will linger on in darkness and in doubt, as nightfall in winter that comes without a star. Here you will dwell, bound to your grief under the fading trees, until all the world is changed and all the long years of your life are utterly spent." First of all, that's absolutely beautiful in and of itself. It's part of the second movie, but it's actually taken from Appendix A in Return of the King. And I'll read to you the full entry, and you'll see the similarities. Aragorn, King Elisar, has passed away, and long there he lay, an image of the splendor of the kings of men in glory, undimmed before the breaking of the world. But Arwen went forth from the house, and the light of her eyes was quenched, and it seemed to her people that she had become cold and gray as nightfall in winter that comes without a star. Then she said farewell to Eldarion and to her daughters and to all whom she had loved, and she went out of the city of Minas Tirith and passed away to the land of Lorien, and dwelt there alone under the fading trees until winter came. Galadriel had passed away, and Celeborn had also gone, and the land was silent. There at last, when the Malaran leaves were falling, but spring had not yet come, she laid herself to rest upon Seren Amaroth, and there is her green grave, until the world is changed, and all the days of her life are utterly forgotten by the men that came after, and Eleanor and Nifredil bloom no more east of the sea. The reason I chose this passage is because I think it encompasses the core theme of all of Tolkien's legendarium. I think that the story is about so many things, but the story of Middle-earth comes down to this idea of the elves being immortal and the other races, particularly the men, being mortal, and the friction that causes. The idea of seeking immortality, desiring it, is what lures men to be tempted by Sauron. It's the carrot that he dangles in front of them with the rings, the heart of so many conflicts throughout the ages of Middle-earth. And here we see manifested, just as in the story of Beren and Luthien, this idea of the immortal and mortals, elves and humans, having a rare time where they can have a choice, or where Arwen has a choice to decide to become human or not, and she's weighing the pros and cons of it. From a movie perspective, I think it's one of the most beautiful scenes in the entire trilogy. I'm really glad that the filmmakers, went and found this in the appendices and brought it forth.
You brought tears to my eyes, Jason, just reading that passage from the appendix. I had actually forgotten about that scene in the appendix, Arwen's sort of final moments, and that is absolutely beautiful. It's very sad. Those beautiful flowers that are so representative of Arwen and particularly Luthien. Luthien was that first age elf who married the mortal man. She was the first elf to truly die. The nature of death and the experience of death and life after this life, that was a major, major theme. And in fact, Tolkien said in his letters many, many times that death was the theme of The Lord of the Rings. And especially when you have these two main species, elves and men. I mourn for Luthien and for Arwen, and that Nifrodel and those other beautiful flowers, they never bloom again east of the sea.
All you homeowners have unique needs. Some feel the need to leave up holiday decorations year-round. Others have the need to use their garage as practice space for their new metal band. And because each homeowner has unique needs, Geico helps you get the right coverage for your home and what's in it. That way, you get exactly what's right for you, even if your needs are unique. Get more with Geico.
Are you interested in the paranormal and the supernatural? My name is Daniel, and I am the host of Chilling True Tales. I've realized that we all share our reality with beings we don't understand, and sometimes it's hard to tell what's real and what isn't. That shadow that's standing in the corner watching you, that voice you hear call your name, that strange light in the sky that disappears when you point it out, are they actually there? I have been interested in the paranormal since I was a child, having had my own fair share of experiences. And other people have shared their first-hand experiences with me over the years as well, maybe looking for answers. I started SOS Paranormal to record, investigate, and share this area of interest so that all of you can experience this too. So please join me at Chilling True Tales for real experiences from real people. Now, are you ready?
Aragorn is, of course, the titular character for the third volume, The Return of the King. His return re-established the royal household in Gondor, where the stewards had ruled for many years. One steward, Denethor, had a debate with Gandalf about power and rulership, in which Gandalf said this next line, the favorite line of fellow wanderer John, quote, "The rule of no realm is mine, neither of Gondor nor any other great or small. But all worthy things that are in peril as the world now stands, those are my care. And for my part, I shall not wholly fail of my task. Though Gondor should perish, if anything passes through this night, that can still grow fair or bear fruit and flower again in days to come. For I also am a steward. Did you not know?"
Thank you for having us on the podcast. Thank you for doing the podcast. The content you guys put out is absolutely fantastic. Why I really like the quote is because it dictates, basically perfectly, the mission that Gandalf was sent on, to guide the peoples of Middle-earth, as to steward them, not to take over, not to run things. He does and is sticking to his mission. The second part I really like about it is the fact that Tolkien, just as a writer, nips in the butt anybody who would be like, hey, why didn't the Eagles just take them all the way to Mount Doom? Well, because they didn't, right? Why doesn't Gandalf take on the Witch King? Why doesn't Gandalf just go and clear house? Because that's not his job. Learned a lot of this, learned a lot from you, right? Kind of building everything together, but that's just kind of what it means to me.
Love these thoughts. Thank you, John. And I had actually never considered Gandalf as like the steward. So I love how you say that Gandalf is there to guide and to steward the peoples of Middle Earth, to encourage them to good acts. We know from Unfinished Tales and other sources as well that Gandalf and the other wizards, really, their whole job was to be a counterbalance to Sauron, but they were given specific restrictions to not use their power outwardly. Gandalf did have that restriction of, yes, you have great power, but you cannot use great power. You cannot compel or force the peoples of good in their fight against Sauron. You can aid, you can guide, you can teach, you can steward, you can shepherd them, but you cannot force them. Love that. Beautiful thought. Thank you, John. Of course, Gandalf was instrumental in all the events that brought about the downfall of Sauron, not the least of which was saving the Rohirrim from destruction, so that they could come to the aid of Gondor. The king of Rohan, Theoden, died on the field of battle outside the walls of the White City, at the hand of no less than the chief of the Nazgul, the Witch King himself. This is a powerful line and a little long, but honestly, I had no heart to trim any of it down, since two fellow Middle-earth wanderers gave this as their favorite passage, Kevin as well as David the Lorehound. The Lorehounds are wonderful friends of the show, and you may remember John Lorehound from episode number 160, where we discussed the current state of all the on-screen adaptations of Tolkien. Anyway, the favorite line from Kevin and David the Lorehound is this, quote, "But Theoden was not utterly forsaken. The knights of his house lay slain about him, or else mastered by the madness of their steeds were borne far away. Yet one stood there still, Durnhelm the Young, faithful beyond fear, and he wept, for he had loved his lord as a father. Right through the charge Merry had been borne unharmed behind him, until the shadow came, and then Windolpha had thrown them in his terror, and now ran wild upon the plain. Merry crawled on all fours like a dazed beast, and such a horror was on him that he was blind and sick. Kingsman, his heart cried within him, you must stay by him. As a father you shall be to me, you said. But his will made no answer, and his body shook. He dared not open his eyes or look up. Then, out of the blackness in his mind, he thought he heard Durnhelm speaking. Yet now the voice seemed strange, recalling some other voice that he had known. Begone, foul Dwimmerlake, lord of Carrion. Leave the dead in peace. A cold voice answered, Come not between the Nazgul and his prey, or he will not slay thee in thy turn. He will bear thee away to the houses of lamentation, beyond all darkness, where thy flesh shall be devoured, and thy shriveled mind be left naked to the lidless eye. A sword rang as it was drawn. Do what you will, but I will hinder it if I may. Hinder me, thou fool! No living man may hinder me. Then Merry heard of all sounds in that hour the strangest. It seemed that Durnhelm laughed, and the clear voice was like the ring of steel. But no living man am I. You look upon a woman. Éowyn I am, Éowyn's daughter. You stand between me and my lord and kin. Be gone, if you be not deathless. For living or dark undead, I will smite you if you touch him.
I first read The Lord of the Rings when I was in 6th grade, age 11 or 12, and I remember squealing when it was revealed that Durnhelm was actually Éowyn. I thought that was fantastic. I did not see that coming. The language that both Éowyn and the Witch King use was just very powerful, very sharp. She just showed how brave she was standing there before this dreaded figure when all the others around were fleeing and running in panic. It was such a cool visual image that Tolkien painted. It was unfortunately very disappointing for the movies. This was not done as it was in the book. It was very truncated, and I felt very cheated. That's the one scene I would have loved to have seen, and it was it really fell flat for me.
Hey, David from the Lorehounds here. My quote is actually inspired by the Jackson movies. It's just been a long time since I read the book, so I don't have a lot of that stuff fresh in my mind. And I think this scene stands out more than anything, maybe except for the shot of the ring laying in the snow. I just love visually that shot, but that's a visual thing. But from a story character, this is just the most incredible in my mind. It just really holds a place for me. And obviously going back and rereading the chapter, it's even more rich and more interesting. And I even have additional thoughts about it. There's a lot that's packed into this scene. Obviously, there's questions of transformation. There's questions of redemption even. There's the bittersweet nature of heroism in the face of defeat and tragedy. And it's also about courage, how when you have courage, it's not just about you, but it's also about other people. You literally become a beacon of hope for other people. And courage doesn't have to be a big, grand, sweeping thing. It could be a small thing. It could be daily acts of humanity, just showing your love to people in your life by word or by deed. Indeed, I think if we examine the scene a little bit closer, Éowyn was surely doomed, right? But it was a small act of courage and bravery by Merry that altered the circumstances and allowed Éowyn to end the nightmare of the Witch King. And for me, that small act by Merry and that big act by Éowyn are so powerful, and in a time of confusion and conflict, we need that even more now. So yeah, I'm going to hold this scene a little closer in my mind as we move into a very uncertain future. Thanks for doing this project, Aaron. I'm excited to listen to it. All the best to one and all.
Kevin and John, thank you for sharing your thoughts on that. This reveal of Éowyn on the field of battle, it's striking. It really is striking. It was a little truncated in the films. It's shortened. I'm sorry, Kevin, that it fell a little bit flat for you. John, yes, this whole scene, I think as John said, the bittersweet heroism in the face of tragedy, courage in big acts and in small acts, even when we feel like we are doomed, and help comes from some unlooked for place. The sudden joyous turn of help and hope that comes to us, as Tolkien would call a eucatastrophe. This is one of those great moments of what I would call mini eucatastrophe in the grand scheme of the story. Theoden is dead. He's already dying. There's not really anything that Durnhelm or Éowyn could do for him, but yet she stands over his body anyway. She stays loyal to the very end. That is quite courageous. It's very brave. And then you have Merry. I mean, what are the chances? What are the chances in the whole world of Middle-earth that on this battlefield that there is, number one, a woman who would be able to bypass the prophecy that the Witch King would never die by the hand of a man, and two, a hobbit carrying one of the swords that used to be used in battle against the Witch King and his forces all the way back hundreds and hundreds of years before. Just the chances of this are just so unlikely. It's beautiful that Tolkien he's able to weave all of this complexity and beauty into his stories and just deliver these powerful moments that make us squeal when we see Éowyn unveiled and Merry is there on the field of battle to help out in some small way. We see these moments of great courage and great bravery, and hopefully we can take that and put that into our lives in some way, whatever representation the Witch King is for the challenge or problem in your life. I hope that you can stand like Éowyn or stand like Merry and do what you can courageously in the face of certain doom, certain death, and that shadow. Well, Éowyn laughed in the face of the Witch King, and very far away, Frodo and Sam find a little laughter of their own as they climb the stairs to the secret tunnel that will lead them to Mordor. And that brings us to the next favorite line from a fellow Middle-earth wanderer, and someone who I had to restrain from buying any more books on her Nook until she finished reading The Two Towers. Don't worry, this is the favorite line of one of my very own daughters. Quote, "It's saying a lot too much," said Frodo, and he laughed, a long, clear laugh from his heart. Such a sound had not been heard in those places since Sauron came to Middle-earth. To Sam, suddenly it seemed as if all the stones were listening and the tall rocks leaning over them. But Frodo did not heed them. He laughed again. "Why, Sam," he said, "to hear you somehow makes me as merry as if the story was already written. But you've left out one of the chief characters, Samwise the Stout-Hearted. I want to hear more about Sam, Dad. Why didn't they put in more of his talk, Dad? That's what I like. It makes me laugh. And Frodo wouldn't have got far without Sam, would he, Dad?" "Now, Mr. Frodo," said Sam, "you shouldn't make fun. I was serious." "So was I," said Frodo.
My favorite line that Tolkien wrote is when Frodo says he could not get far without Sam, shows that we all need a Samwise in our life. I really love this because of Sam. He is my favorite character to the point that we named our dog after him, and Sam definitely deserves to be recognized by Frodo for being there for him.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for that. Yes, we did name our dog Samwise. His name is Samwise Gamgee. Usually we call him Sam. But yeah, absolutely love this moment where Frodo recognizes how far he would not have got without Sam, and that Sam and his friendship, his loyalty, his encouragement, his lifting up ability just is really what carries Frodo all of the way to Mordor. There's a lot of conversation about who's the true hero of The Lord of the Rings. Is it Frodo? Is it Sam? I used to tend to lean into the side of Sam as the real hero until I interviewed two individuals who recreated a Mordor-like hike in the Tetons. You may remember that from episode number 183, Real Life Ring Quest, Friendship Adventure, and the Teton Trail. And one of those guests said that the true hero there is the friendship that Sam and Frodo had together, and that relationship that they had, their love for each other, that was able to carry them through the lands of darkness and to finally accomplish the task that had been set before Frodo so long ago. So I like to lean on the side of friendship is the real hero here. We just looked at Éowyn and the Witch King. She laughs at the Witch King. We look at Frodo, who's laughing in this dark place right on the borders of Mordor. We heard earlier talk about how evil does not comprehend goodness. And one of those ways is that you have these moments of laughter in the darkness, laughter in the face of evil. Evil in Lord of the Rings has no sense of humor. It has no sense of irony. It has only hubris and despair. And laughter, or finding joy, finding light, even in the midst of darkness, and being able to defy darkness with laughter. We come now to the final favorite passage of a fellow Middle-earth wanderer, Becca Tarnaz. If you have not listened to my interview with Becca, then you are indeed missing out. She shared some insights about J.R.R. Tolkien that brought chills to my heart and tears to my eyes. You can find that conversation in episode number 135. For today, Becca chose a line that many of us could likely quote in our sleep. It's one of those wise insights that only a character like Gandalf can say.
Of all the passages in Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings, the one that perhaps means the most to me is this. It's when Frodo has learned the history of the One Ring and the perilous moment in which he and all the free peoples of Middle-earth stand. And he says, "I wish it need not have happened in my time." And I have to ask, how many of us have also felt that? How many of us feel that now, as the days seem to darken around us? But listen to how Gandalf responds. "So do I," said Gandalf, "and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us." This is such a potent reminder that while we are bound by the times into which we are born, we nonetheless have the freedom to choose how we spend that time. It can be spent in denial and frivolity, or in despair and despondency. But it can also be spent by applying ourselves diligently and responsibly through hard work, by struggling against the tide of desolation and destruction. It can be spent in reverence, wonder, and awe for the extraordinary world in which we live. It can be spent in prayer or in action, It can be spent by making beauty through the artistry of our lives and the poetry of our intentions. And it can also be spent in joy and celebration, even in the most dire and seemingly hopeless times. Gandalf is inviting us to remember that we always have that choice to decide what to do with the gift of the time that we do have.
Becca, thank you for those beautiful and wonderful words regarding this passage from Gandalf. This is one of those key things that I come back to time and time again. We don't always get to choose the suffering or the unfair things or the challenges that come our way. We don't usually get to choose those. But we do get to choose what we do with our time. We do get to choose how we respond to those struggles. Not only is that fighting against darkness, sometimes we need to choose to use our time in reverence and in prayer and in the making of beauty, the artistry of our lives, as you put it so beautifully. This is wisdom from Gandalf. And I think Gandalf here is channeling his inner author, right? Is his inner J.R.R. Tolkien. What an amazing thought it is that this piece of advice comes from Tolkien to Gandalf to Frodo and by extension to all of us. Tolkien was a man who would much rather be reading poetry and studying words and making beauty in this world, and he suddenly finds himself in the trenches of one of the bloodiest battles of World War I, the Battle of Somme. And he ends up getting sick and trench fever and has to deal with that. He comes home, you deal with all of the post-war sort of situations that are happening. You fast forward a little bit again, and you have World War II, and now Tolkien is again involved in the war effort, this time not so much as a soldier, but on the home front, and yet he has to send his own sons all around the world to again fight in another world war. And they come back, and you have to deal with all the challenges of post-war world. You know, just think of anybody saying this to Tolkien, right? I wish it need not have happened in my time. So do I, says Tolkien, and so do all who live to see such times. But that is not for them to decide. All we have to decide is what to do with the time that is given us. And that time is precious. When you are a mortal human, your time is fleeting and it passes away. It passes away faster than you would like it to. And you need to be wise in the choice of what you do with it. Well, I know that your time is precious, and I appreciate and thank you for spending this time with me. And a big thank you to all of our fellow Middle-earth wanderers who shared their thoughts, their favorite passages. This was a project long in the making, and you've been all so patient, and thank you for your thoughts that you shared, and thank you for listening with me today. Thank you for wandering Middle-earth with me in 200 episodes. Even in all of that time, we have only just begun to explore Middle-earth. Are you ready for more? Let's wander.
There are some things you wouldn't mind being stuck with, like a large unexpected inheritance. An always on the verge of death phone that has to be plugged in just right so it charges is not one of those things. Switch to Verizon and we'll pay off your old phone, up to $800 via prepaid MasterCard, so you can get a new one. Just trade in any phone from our top brands on any unlimited plan. With new line on My Plan. Additional terms apply for trade-in and pay off your phone offer. See Verizon.com for details.
A young knight named Sir Dashing Jr. only got knighted because they couldn't knight his dad twice. Now he's determined to prove that he's worthy of his new title. Along with an awkward friar, an aspiring ranger, and a book-loving orc, Sir DJ will venture across the territory to find the amulet of the goddess, proving that he's worthy of his knightly title. The Legend of by Aaron N. Hall is an affectionate parody of the fantasy genre, receiving praise from audiences and critics alike. Go to AaronNHall.com to download a free early copy of The Legend of before its release on February 25th, 2025. So what are you waiting for? Download it today. That's AARON, another N, HALL.com.